Farzad, welcome to the show. How are you?
I'm doing well, Martin. Good to meet you.
Likewise, great to connect. Really looking forward to today's conversation, given specifically a lot of the background that you have in the world of value engineering, value consulting. But we'll get to that in a moment. I think for the benefit of the audience, it would be great if you wouldn't mind just giving a little bit of a background on yourself, your kind of work history, and what's led you along this career.
Oh yeah, I'm probably been in this field for such a long time, and I think my journey started as a transition. I was an IT manager in the DC area, and I had a little bit of frustrations about sort of articulating why for for my budget, for my small team, and so forth. So I went to business school, and that gave me a different lens on it. So I got my MBA. And out of that, I entered the software world, and starting with a German company called Software AG, which is strictly a very old school mainframe. But that's where I kind of crafted sort of the TCO story, right? And the business process improvement. So I took that and I went to the first place with the title of value, where it was Teradata. And Teradata, with some colleagues that had started from the SAP world or were influenced by it, had that very deep business value consulting COE. So I spent about 5 years there, and I learned a lot.
The term value was already used in the title.
Yes, it was called, and that's an interesting thing, Martin. So, because about a 5-year, 6-year journey, and the company's doing well, but your career, you want to decide what's next, and the world that we have today of that you're part of, right? Value engineering, value consulting, wasn't really there, and you're like, do I have a solution? Do I go in the technical bent, or do I go sort of the management consulting path? Was sort of the thing, or do you just go to management and and then it sort of it exploded, right? So, and I think the SaaS world sort of had a lot of influence on that as well. So,
where do you think that explosion came from? Was it some people just became very well known for successful rollouts of value?
Yeah, it's a good question, right? So you're sort of on the side. I'm sitting in some companies that are a little bit older, like the Teradata's, and before that, the Software AGs. And then there's a big explosion of startups, right? And then the cloud, and then you got the software as a service, and you're no longer, locking in and owning the data center and the investment. It's you have to constantly articulate and defend your value, right? So I think that was a dimension of it. So I think that's, and then the success that, that the SAP world had. And then of course, Oracle kind of had that. And I too, I think it was a company in Dallas that back in the day, had done some of this. So when I saw my older peers, when I was younger, had come out of that world and had sort of built out some of that. So yeah, the question is, I think the change in pricing and how you sell software had changed. So.
Yeah, that's a really good point, because it's almost like there's specifically some of these cloud companies where data cloud, where the product is less tangible, and it's more how can you apply that product to the pain point and the needs of a customer. So you need to suddenly structure a sale away from a product demo, because you're not really going to demo anything, and more to identifying the pain, right? The classic MedPick model, right?
And I think in my start in this field formally at Teradata was a great start, because it's enterprise data warehouse back in the day and massive parallel processing. What does that mean? On the front end, you had at that time the BI tools and the analytics tools where you could see the tangible benefits of using them to make decision science, right? And you have to draw that thread back to better, faster, cleaner, more trusted data that you can scale. And then not being also in the traditional data center at the time, the IBMs of the world and the Oracles of the air, and you are non-standard, so you had to really articulate value, and it was critical part of how Teradata went to market, right? So. Yeah.
Yeah. And then also you mentioned yourself pricing. One thing, there's an element of usage-based pricing or consumption-based pricing, but there's so many different ways to structure pricing that you need to understand or have a consultative approach to demonstrate your pricing in a way that showcases the value that you can deliver, while at the same time not leaving money on the table because you're delivering value. So it's kind of a dual.
And at some point we can talk about it. My current role at LivePerson, where we really, metrics are the unit of conversation, and sort of we price way, right? And then in the nuances of that, and in terms of what that unit of conversation, what the value is, and articulating that. So,
well, let's dive deep into that, because I think it makes a lot of sense just to understand a little bit more from to the live person, unique pricing model and how that aligns with the value practice.
Yeah. It's an interesting, because we're going through a transition, and we're gonna, and the market is right. You see agentic AI and so forth, and conversational, AI and that experience. So, what's the package that software services success that makes the customer successful and drives ROI, right? And the benefits and the wonderful thing we have here at LivePerson is we have 30 years of history, which some companies don't, and we've always measured the consumption, if you will, of our product, because that's how we've traditionally, we just called it daily active relationships, right? DARs, right? So, and we talked about that.
Nice.
And quantified that. So it's, in some ways it's easier, but some way elevating that, and then back to our sort of the bigger theme of value selling, right? Do you want to stay to the conversational context center discussions, or do you want to elevate it to sort of transformational discussions? So there's a lot of work to do, but pricing is critical to it. So, yeah.
I would imagine in the world of value, there's nothing more poetic than to have your own North Star metric completely integrated into your pricing model, because then that's pure alignment, right?
100%. Yeah. We can talk about places I've been past, and where you have to do an archival, you have to go there, and say, what if you pulled out the software? What does it look like 6 years ago? I wasn't here 6 years ago. We had a org, and there's so many challenges, and still challenges with the current way, and the benefits we have with having the unit of measurement, but it makes it a lot easier, and it makes it more in the projecting value, right? Because we measured it, right? So
totally. I mean, we're at Simbi, we're a relatively new company, right? So we started very early. When you're a startup, you start for very basic pricing, and then you can explore how you can price based on performance, right? So we started on a per seat basis, as you would imagine, pure SaaS. But now we're seeing, based on the numbers and the success metrics, our KPIs, we can start being more creative with pricing, because we know where we can put skin in the game and know where we can deliver. And I think ultimately any company wants to be in a position where they're so confident of what their value delivery is. When we talk about value realization in a moment, that they should be able to price based on that delivery, that performance, or outcome-based pricing.
Oh yeah, and that's something, every company is doing this journey, right to that outcomes based. And how do you measure that? What the guardrails you put in there, and what's the floor and the ceilings, and sort of then you have sort of your CFO office, and if you're a public company, how do you have to have some guardrails around that, right? So it's an interesting world, but it's, I think, where everybody's going, right? So. Yeah.
I found, though, so it's sometimes one can be a bit naive, and I speak from my personal experience. When you're a company and you want to offer your customers something that is really performance based, right? Mm-hmm. Which ultimately means that they will get more value. But sometimes you get some resistance saying that's too complicated, because we need to be able to budget something, and so we want the predictability. We're happy to pay more, even if we don't. So it's there. How do you? I'd love to hear your experience and understanding from when you work with procurement.
Yeah, I think it goes to the, I think I spent a stint at AWS, right? And and you have the elasticity of the technology and the services, but for the larger contracts that, we would work on, and the multi-million-dollar enterprise data center migrations, you have a commitment, right, in a contract, because you do some of that value work is a little bit of like projecting your demand plan in the future, right? So I have a certain cost on my data center, and this is what I think the consumption of all these services, i.e. what my projection of our future state is. And then then the customer agrees with all that sort of negotiations and procurement stuff, that we're going to pay this much because we think we're going to consume that much. So there's that's something you kind of locks in at that level. And then there's negotiations, or there's gates around the year where it says, oh, I'm underusing it, I'm overusing it, I need extra, I need less. You oversold me, you undersold me. That can be that part, right? So,
yeah, it can get messy, right, at the end of the year.
Exactly.
What is your preference from the vendor side?
Oh, that's a big question, right? And it's a depends answer, right? So,
Sure.
if we have the processes, the tools, the measurement, right? And I don't sit in the finance organization. I don't go in every quarter and present our earnings. There's that sort of predictability, right? And that takes some of that away. But I think we're like here at LivePerson and we tried this at my company SaaS Institute a while ago. And that's a lot of value and analytics, and we were exploring the outcome-based pricing, right? But I think there's a subset of customers that really want that, and we want to. And sometimes there's another angle is the partner level, right? So if you leverage the partners can manage of it. So business process outsourcing, BPOs, are a decent part of what the contact center is, which is some part of what LivePerson deals with. So with that partner may be willing to take on an outcome-based pricing, right? Or they can sell that then to a fixed price to their customer and they get the margin. There's a lot of nuances that we're still exploring, but it's a fascinating place. I don't have the answer, and I don't think I have a preference at this point. It's still in the exploratory phase. So.
And like you said, it really depends. There's a lot of circumstantial requirements there. And so we talked a little bit about the different schools of experience in the value space, right? There's the BMC, the Blade Logic BMC journey. There's the SAP. There's even like the consultants, Accenture, McKinsey's that move into value, and they all kind of blend into the value practice as a whole. But you have a unique set of experiences where you've kind of interwoven many of these at different companies. I'd love your experience, and what are some of the nuanced differences in the methodologies for value across them?
I think that's a fascinating one, and sometimes it kind of sometimes when you do too much or you've been around too long, more complex than they have to be. Sometimes younger people that come straight from one school or they come straight from management consulting and haven't seen that, and that's fine. But I would say sort of the SAP world use the term, and I started with value consulting. Well, they called it value. I think somebody at SAP invented the term value engineering applied to what we do versus the cost side and pure engineering. But it's really, they were very good at consulting, right? And delivering that consultative engagement. So a BVA, if you will, right? We say, I'm going to interview 40 people across the enterprise. I'm going to capture data, and we're going to have, weekly touch points with the sponsor, and then present it to the executives at the end, and so forth, and build a plan. And especially if you think in the world of SAPs, the ERPs of the world, right? They take long projects and then multi-million-dollar transformative. Teradata had similar. These were enterprise data where we need to bring in a single version of the tools in a massive parallel process. So they are really good at that, right? So aligning the technology to value for a specific program or a project. I would say the management consultants really understand management consulting. They're brilliant at that. They may not understand the technology at the level. So a lot of my peers came from the SC world, or the SA or the TAM world, very technical, relatively to me, and bring that skill. And so I think that third lever is the BMC, PTC, Blade Logic world, and I think they bring the value selling, the broad. And I think for me it was
that's it.
Yeah. Because I went from IBM to BMC, and I thought I knew what I was doing, and it opened up a much new world for me. And I thought
it sharpens a different sword, right? Almost, because there's a continuum, right? There's the highly consultative on one side, which is the traditional McKinsey, Accenture, which is very, very consulting. Then there's a consultative selling, which is the SAPs, like you said, the ERPs. And then there's the value selling that has value enabled in it, but it is much more around the sale. And it's it's just occurring because it is a continuum, right? Of a gamut of how much is hands-off value analytics and assessment, and how much is it hands-on, on the ground, selling and actual engaging on an actual sales process.
Exactly. And you have sales leaders or value leaders that come from these different schools. And when you have conversations with them, and you have to kind of understand define what value, consulting is, value engineering in your mind. What are you trying to achieve? And
Yeah.
that back to the conversation I think you've had with many other people, sort of the executive sponsorship, from the CEO down, that we want to do value selling here, and the value engineering practice can be successful, right? So,
And what I found from some of the traditional consultants is the ones that perform the best, the people who come from the McKinsey of the world, are the ones that acknowledge, okay, I've never done sales. I recognize that I need to partner with somebody in sales because they will understand. It's almost
yeah,
like they need to understand the salesperson condition, right? They're not generating pipeline, the consultants, right? They're not doing all the admin, the CRM, and all that stuff. There's a whole set of activities that the salespeople, enterprise, corporate salespeople, and mid-market need to be doing as part of their role, and a whole process of selling that needs to align well and needs to be understood by the value engineer as well. And
I
sometimes,
love
yeah,
I think I've seen some management consultants come in, and because of their natural sort of experience, and they do it really well, and they were built on their billable hours, right? And their thought leadership, and they want to sort of step in and do more, right, and make it perhaps more complicated than the selling is required. Right? So,
yeah, a salesperson somebody said to me, they want to find the fastest way down the hill as possible, right? Because
yes,
you got to hit quota, fees, the whole thing. Consultant's mindset is, of course, like you said, traditional billable hours. Let's make this as comprehensive as possible to make sure that we're capturing everything. But there's a middle point, right?
absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Even when you do it right, sometimes the sellers, if they're not, don't understand as well, they always think, no, we're slowing it down. We're slowing it down to qualify it better, to make it bigger, to make it more
Exactly.
transform, make it larger opportunity. And that's the balance too, right? So,
Yeah, it's that
yeah,
balance. And I think what I found in a lot of the conversations and the companies that we work with, but equally a lot of these interviews, is the there tends to be teams that end up doing a lot of the work together. They pair up a great seller, great salesperson, a great value engineer, and they tend to kind of team up to deliver the best success. And I'm sure that's both a function of synergistic skills, but equally synergistic personalities, right? And have you have
yeah. I love that, the personality part, the skills I get, and the personalities also are in it. And then you have the third dimension. If you have a situation where the SC has to be involved, they also bring a distinct skill set and a distinct personality. It's a nice sort of, I think if done well, it's an orchestra, right? So,
yeah, no, exactly, and at the end of the day, there are a lot of salespeople that can own a spreadsheet, but they don't tend to be hired for their spreadsheets, right? They tend to be hired for their ability to sell, their natural curiosity in the value selling process, and their ability to kind of build relationships. And it's about identifying which skill sets and what activities each party is doing.
absolutely. Yeah. It's interesting how, sometimes, it backs to sort of and somebody looks good in front of the customer, but which one is more trusted in front of the customer? And then there's the one that has the technical depth. There's all sort of layers of that. So I agree.
And across the different schools of thought of value, we talked about BMC, SAP, and all that. Are there real distinct differences, or are they more nuanced? That if you hire someone, they came from SAP, do you kind of know that
I
what?
think
Yeah,
I think there's a distinct. I mean, it may be through the more recent world has sort of come together a little bit more as, even though we're kind of small group of value people around the world, it's larger than it used to be. And I think there's been cross pollination that has. But yeah, if I see an SAP, somebody who's been in that city for a long time and has been there long, and it comes to a new company, let's say they come to a SaaS company and they want to lead the value practice there, they come with that sort of deeper consultative mindset. We want to do BVAs, we want to do assessments, right? And that's our bread and butter. And then when I see some people that come from the sort of the faster growth, scaling, value selling, I was at Data Robot, which a lot of people from App Dynamics came, and then
yes,
it's that sort of machine, and you see the similar with the Octave crowd and so forth. And for them, it's building the foundations of selling, right? The three whys, the value pyramids, and coaching. It's value selling, and then secondary, not secondary, but at the same time, we have to kind of make sure we have whether it was called a value assessment, whatever the term is, it's that engagement with the customer. And that tends to be limited to the transformative larger deals. So it's a lot more about scaling and selling. When I see somebody who comes from that background versus the SAP, which they have more of the deeper consultant, but I've seen them, adapt, right? But it's sort of, that's the natural sort of strengths of each side. So.
It's interesting because we speak to a lot of people in the value space, and we see a lot of movement. One day we're speaking to somebody in one company, and then they're moving to another company. It may be cultural for each organization, but equally for each value engineer. Where, I've spoken to somebody that was at a certain company for, say, 3 years, and now they're moving on to somewhere else, and they say, "Yeah, my job is done. My job was to introduce a value program into this company, embed it into the culture. That's done. It's performing great. Now it's almost like the A team, come in, set it up, and then go on to the next one. Whereas in other organizations, it's less about a discrete project of bringing in the value practice, introducing it, and getting it into a well-greased machine, and more really about forming a key part of their enterprise and strategic sales team.
Yeah, I've seen both. You've seen my background. Unfortunately, I've been many, many places, right? And sometimes, it's also the context of the technology, the company you're at, right? And the economics of the world, right? So some of my changes are not because I've finished building something. It's because the market, that product, that company has challenges, and you have to go on to the next one.
Of course.
I've seen some of my the people I respect and that have led some of these practices. Mike Murphy, who went to App Dynamics, from there he went to Zscaler, and I think now he's at Nutanix. These people, they build and scale, and then their job is done. They're looking for that. I think that's sort of to the CRO model, right? The CRO comes to fix or to build that machine, and then their job is done. They're going to go
18-month shelf life, they say. It's a shame, right? Because sometimes that's a little bit too little time to really make change.
Yeah, but I think it goes back to that sports analogy. I used to follow sports a lot, and it's like you bring a coach to kind of, and the players don't like the coach, but he's making difference, right? But after like 2 years, that energy is gone, and people they don't realize what was before. They just look at how challenging it is to work. and time is done, right? You have to go on. So
especially in sales, because like you said, I think it's a really good analogy with sales, because with sports, because with sales it is about hitting the numbers, right? It could be your own quota, it could be your attach rate. I guess it depends how you're measured, and so there's less of an emotional attachment to the role. You may love the people you work with, but it is very much about individual performance, but company performance, the state of the market. All these things have to be working in tandem for the organization.
Absolutely, yeah. And I don't know if there was what's coming up next, because I do think I think this is a topic that's AI is bringing some changes to the world, right? And I think what's going to happen with this model, but I do think selling is selling, right? And to your point, the people that do that tend to have a lot of, they look at the data, right? They're very much have their processes, and they should, right? And that's what they measure. They may like the people they work with, they probably do, but they get the dials moving in the right speed at the right format, executing, they're done. So
now let's get to the emotional side of it. What is it that you love about this job? What is it that you're because you've made your career in value. What is that you're most passionate about?
I love exploring different companies, right? So I live in the Washington D.C. area, and despite what's the challenges in the federal government, but traditionally, a lot of my friends and colleagues who I grew up with or have lived, my neighbors, they stay with the same government agency, or maybe, other companies, it's insurance or financial services, 30, 40 years, they have a cubicle, maybe they got an office, and they know that company really well, right? I get the opportunity to come in and explore in manufacturing one day. I go to retail the next day. I do healthcare. I get to see, and when I went to business school, that kind of piqued my interest on how businesses work. And I said, I like to that really excites me. And I like working with sellers. Their personalities, they're interesting. Everybody comes in. It's fascinating. And the more I've been in this world, sellers come from every corner of the world, right? And every background. You could have been musicians. They could have been theologians. They have, different parts of their lives, and it's fascinating. So I enjoy the people part a lot, and I explore the business side of different companies. So, yeah. And I guess last thing I would say is that blend of technical, finance, and and consulting. It's unique, right? So absolutely. So
yeah, I think we talked about this earlier. I don't know if there's more than up to maybe 500 people in globally in the business value community, right? In on the client side. I'm not talking about consulting side.
Absolutely, yeah, and I think that's growing. And I think we talked about this a little bit earlier. It's the management consulting world has really found value consulting,
yes,
engineering, and whereas I would say 6-7 years ago they weren't. And I think there was a prestige to being in a management consultant, like McKinsey or BCG.
Totally.
And then now there's like the work-life balance and the expectations of moving to partner. Some of those things you get the same sort of energy out of what you do in value consulting. In fact, so perhaps more. So I've seen a lot of those people come into our space than they were 10 years ago or 6 years ago. So, yeah.
And having been in a number of these different companies, I've heard in other fireside chat sets, what's really critical when you do join to maybe set up a value program is that you have the full support and buy-in from the very top. Because sometimes I've heard anecdotally that, the company may think that they need value engineering. They may not really understand what it is. They just think of it as an opportunity to help maybe go up market in their segments, but don't quite understand sometimes the foundational changes that need to happen in order to really instill a value practice. Would love your thoughts on that.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think, and I've been in when I joined BMC, it was an interesting. They did it really well. The PTC, the Blade Logic history,
yes.
Was fascinating. But I came in within the Jeff Hess came in from SAP, and took it to the next level. It brought a value selling to the solution consultants to every role, and elevated us, right? So. So there was executive buy-in. Our executives at the time had come from SAP or they come from Salesforce. They understood this, and the board did. Other places, some of the startups I was at more recently, they understand it, but the product market fit is not quite there. It's maybe too early in the.
It's a really good point.
And you're still trying to find that. So it's interesting. You get a fascinating world of trying to do everything, right? Your product marketing, you have to build those personas. You got to find, instead of the differentiators, you got to work on pricing. There's a lot of more work to do. But yeah, I think, and more recently, Life Person, I think is fascinating. We're doing a transformation here. We were challenged in the recent years, and we're turning the company around. And there is a very what we call a digital outcomes approach here that we brought in, which is really value selling. And I think, we're in the transitions of bringing that. So my role did not exist before. About 5 months ago, 6 months ago, I joined, and I'm layering in what I have to do on top of what was recently introduced, which was value selling under the term outcome approach. So.
You mentioned something that really resonated with me because we are a startup, right? And I've had different companies of different varying sizes, which is, and paraphrasing, it sounds like you need, in order to be ready for the value practice, bringing in value engineers, the value setup, you have to already have established unequivocally your product market fit. You can't still be testing, teasing, it just doesn't seem like you're ready for it.
Value engineering practice, building, scaling, and so agreed, yes. But I did have I spent this company called Armada, which actually one of the co-founders was the former CEO of Data Robot, part of the App Dynamics journey that he took. Dan Wright, he understood, but I think. So he was excited to bring me or value engineering in because we knew each other.
Yeah.
But I think that aspect had not been matured. So you end up, like any stealth and then the Series A company, you have to help build the other parts, right? Before you really value engineering, you can do any substantial work.
But same thing, like even with a VP of sales, you don't hire a VP of sales until you're ready to scale. Right, you got to do founder-led sales, founder mode, until you've absolutely nailed a big enough product market fit that you're ready to double down and scale. Right?
100%. Yeah, I think when I joined Armada, it was very exciting, and I think it's going to be a successful company, but it still is working through that time period where it needs to build the other stuff, engineering, product, and so forth. Some way peers in the value space, so they're happy for me, but at the same time, isn't that too early? Okay, it's going to be fun, whatever it is. So.
I'm sure. Well, look, I got a couple more questions for you. Okay. First one is, we talked a lot about your different experiences. Surely you must have worked with a million or lots of fantastic people. For everybody that you worked with in the value space and value practice, who's the best that you've ever worked with?
You put me on the spot. I'm thinking,
absolutely.
I got to preface it, but there's lots of brilliant ones, and each of them through my journey have helped me. But I would say, I think there's three names that come to mind, right? My Data Robot sort of teammates, my boss, Joe Marcantonio and Dylan, that we worked nicely together, three of us. But I also stepped back to when I came to BMC, he's a still friend of mine, Jeff Gandula. He brought he gave me that transition from the SAP world to the value world, and I think he was brilliant in doing that, and he's still a coach to me, and we talked all the time. So
that's great, and it is quite a community, right? There's a lot of camaraderie in this. People may be competing companies, but they don't really compete with each other.
No, not at all. And we all text and call, and it's fun.
not on Signal, right? Not on Signal. Let's not even go there. The other question is, who is the best salesperson that you ever worked with?
The most recent one I hear at Live Person, I want to just call out. There's a relatively young gentleman. Everybody's young in my generation, but David Cerna, Paris. He used to work with me over at Data Robot, and here we're trying to transform. And he's stepped up in many ways. He's relatively young and built his career. I love what he's trying to do. When I first started BMC, I also call out Marcello Gallo, which is and Parmo Pala at Data Robot. So those names come to mind. So
brilliant. Well, Farzad, really enjoyed the conversation. Thank you so much for making the time.
You've been wonderful. Thanks for your time, and thanks for the invitation. Good seeing you.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Take care.